The morning mist hung low over the quiet shooting range, casting a ghostly stillness across the cold metal rails. Claire Bennett stood alone at the far end, her eyes sharp, but her heart heavy with memories that refused to fade. She wasn't here for the thrill of competition or the weight of a medal, she was here because silence had lasted too long. Years ago, her father, a former national shooting champion, was framed and disgraced, his legacy stripped from him by someone who craved glory more than honor. That betrayal had buried him before the illness ever could. Claire, once determined to walk a different path, now found herself standing in the same position he had once stood, rifle in hand, pain in her chest, justice burning in her soul. The distant echoes of her father's teachings still rang in her ears. Stand steady. Breathe deep. Aim true, not just with your hands, but with your heart. She had returned not to prove her skill, but to reclaim the truth, for her father, for herself, and for everyone who ever paid the price for someone else's lie. The dry desert wind rolled over the hills of Red Rock, Nevada, carrying with it the echoes of gunfire from the annual National Precision Shooting Championship. Dust kicked up from the scorched ground as spectators packed into the grandstands, their eyes fixed on the range. It was a place where reputations were built, legends born, and occasionally, where they were buried. Claire Bennett stood just outside the arena, her fingers tightening around the worn grip of her father's vintage rifle. The same gun he had used in his last competition, his final match before disgrace had stolen everything. Her breath was steady, but her heart pounded beneath her ribcage. Today wasn't just about winning. It was about reclaiming her family's honor. 10 years ago, her father, Daniel Bennett, was the top marksman in the country. Known for his calm demeanor and unshakable focus, he was poised to win his third national title when a scandal ripped through the shooting community. A vial of performance-enhancing drugs was found in his locker. Despite his protests and an unblemished record, he was disqualified, stripped of his titles, and banned for life. He had never recovered. Claire had been 16 at the time, just beginning to train under his watchful eye. The shame had destroyed not only his career, but the very fabric of their family. Daniel fell into depression and disappeared from the public eye, retreating to a small cabin in the hills outside Carson City. For years, Claire had watched the light in his eyes dim. But now, at 26, she had returned to the same competition, not just to compete, but to confront the truth. Her rival stood waiting in the shade of a VIP tent, Marcus Hale, her father's former teammate and now a celebrated champion with multiple titles under his belt. He was charismatic, composed, and loved by the media. But Claire had spent years piecing together the inconsistencies, collecting whispers, old photos, and stories that didn't align. She was convinced Marcus had framed her father. Claire Bennett, a voice crackled over the loudspeaker. "You're up next." She exhaled slowly, adjusted the sling of her rifle, and stepped into the sun-baked arena. The crowd quieted. This was her debut, an underdog, but one with fire behind her name. As she took her position on the range, Claire's mind flashed back to the long nights in the mountains training with her father, the way his voice would grow distant when he thought about the past. "Focus on the shot, not the noise," he used to say. "You only get one clean shot to make it count." She dropped to a knee, adjusted the scope, and tuned out the crowd. Her fingers moved with the ease of muscle memory, but her chest burned with emotion. This wasn't just about a score, it was about truth. When the buzzer rang, Claire squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed, crisp and clean. Bullseye. The crowd erupted, but Claire didn't celebrate. She had more targets to hit, and more truth to uncover. The cheers of the crowd reverberated in Claire's ears, but they felt distant, as if they were coming from a world far removed from her own. She had hit the target, of course she had. But there was no time to bask in the glory of a perfect shot. The real test was yet to come, and it was far more personal. Marcus Hale stepped up to the range next. He was all confidence, flashing a charming smile as he waved to the audience. His team stood behind him, their eyes trained on the range with a mix of respect and expectancy. To the world, he was a champion, a man above reproach. To Claire, he was the architect of her father's ruin. She studied him from across the field. The sun cast long shadows, and Marcus's face was framed by the gleaming edge of his rifle. His movements were smooth, practiced. But Claire wasn't looking at his technique, she was watching for the slightest twitch, the smallest crack in his mask. She had been doing this for years, scrutinizing every photo, every interview, every whisper in the underground shooting forums where people spoke in hushed tones about the great scandal. She had no proof, yet. But Claire trusted her instincts. And they told her that Marcus wasn't the man everyone thought he was. The whistle blew, signaling the start of his round. Marcus's first shot hit the target with precision. The crowd clapped, but there was something cold about the way they cheered for him. She wasn't the only one who felt the tension. Claire's hands were steady, her heart thumping hard in her chest. She knew what was at stake. As Marcus made his final adjustment, she couldn't help but feel the weight of her father's legacy, the bitter taste of betrayal, and the desire for justice. Time seemed to stretch as Marcus lined up his final shot. The rifle cracked, and the sound was met with a collective gasp from the audience. His bullet had grazed the edge of the bullseye, just enough to secure him the win, but there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Claire saw it in the way the crowd's applause faltered, how some faces grew uncertain. For a split second, Marcus's confident facade faltered too. It was so brief, so fleeting, that Claire almost missed it. But she didn't. She took a deep breath, glancing down at the photograph in her pocket, the faded, torn picture of her father, smiling with a younger Marcus beside him. It had been taken years before the scandal, a time when they were inseparable, when Marcus had been like a brother to Daniel. She knew that picture better than she knew her own face. And she knew, deep down, that the man in the photo was not the same one who stood before her now. The competition continued, but Claire's mind was miles away. As the rounds wore on, she pushed herself harder, faster, more precise. She had to make it to the final round. She had to be there when the truth came to light. By the time the final shots were called, the tension between the two competitors was palpable. Claire had secured a spot in the top tier, but the real showdown would come when it was her and Marcus head-to-head. Everything had led up to this moment. This wasn't just about proving she was the better shooter, it was about confronting the man who had destroyed her father's life. The final round would determine the champion, but for Claire, it was more than that. It was about redemption. Backstage, Claire was alone, her breath quick and shallow. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand, feeling the sweat that had nothing to do with the heat of the competition. Her mind was racing. The truth was within her grasp, but the closer she got to the final round, the more uncertain she became. What would happen when she finally faced Marcus? Would he try to silence her, or would he fold under the weight of his own guilt? Suddenly, a familiar voice broke her concentration. Claire. She turned, her pulse quickening. Her father stood in the doorway, his weathered face more haggard than she remembered, but the same strong jaw and intense eyes that had once looked at her with pride now seemed filled with sorrow. "Dad," she said, her voice breaking slightly. Daniel Bennett stepped forward, his gaze locked on hers. "You've come this far. But don't do something you'll regret." Claire felt the sting of his words. She wasn't sure whether he was warning her about the competition or something far deeper. She took a step toward him, her throat tight. "I can't let him get away with it, Dad. I can't let him win, not after everything he's done." Daniel's eyes softened, and for a moment, he looked like the father she remembered, strong, unwavering. But then, his gaze shifted, and something darker flickered across his face. "You don't know the whole story, Claire." The words hung in the air between them, unspoken but heavy with meaning. Claire opened her mouth to speak, but her father's hand shot out, stopping her. "Not now. Please. Not in front of them." Claire swallowed hard, her hands trembling. She wanted to shout, to demand answers, but she knew this wasn't the time. She could sense the danger in her father's voice, the warning to tread carefully. Her mind raced, her heart thundered. "Okay," she whispered, "but when this is over, I need you to tell me the truth." Daniel nodded, the lines on his face deepening. "I will, I promise." The air was electric, charged with an intensity that could be felt in every breath Claire took. She was ready, her focus razor-sharp as she positioned her rifle, her eyes narrowing on the distant target. The target felt more like a metaphor now, something she needed to hit, but not just with accuracy. She needed to hit it with purpose, to make the world see that she wasn't just a daughter seeking vengeance, but a woman demanding justice. Her grip tightened on the rifle as she steadied herself, her heartbeat steadying to match the rhythm of her breathing. She glanced once more at Marcus, who stood opposite her, his stance perfect, the familiar smugness replaced by a quiet tension. For the first time, he didn't seem so untouchable. She could see it in his eyes, the flicker of doubt. Claire blocked everything else out. The crowd, the cameras, even her father's lingering presence backstage. The only thing that mattered was the shot. Breathe. Aim. Fire. The sound of the rifle cracking through the air was drowned by the roar of the crowd as Claire's bullet hit the target dead center, perfect, clean, undeniable. A wave of triumph surged through her, but it was fleeting. She had done it, but there was one thing left to do. One thing that would change everything. She turned to face Marcus. The crowd was still roaring as Marcus took his position, and Claire could feel the weight of his eyes on her. She didn't look away. The time had come. Marcus fired. The shot landed just outside the bullseye, good but not good enough. The crowd's applause was polite, restrained, as if they too could sense the shift in the air. Claire's heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. Not now. Not when she was so close. Marcus looked up at the board, his jaw clenched. Claire's perfect shot had set a new standard, and the weight of failure hung heavy on him. He knew it. She could see it in his posture, how his shoulders slumped just slightly, the flicker of frustration crossing his face. But Claire wasn't done. The announcer's voice rang out, and the crowd's attention shifted back to the stage. And now, we move to the final declaration. The champion of today's competition. Claire Bennett. The applause was deafening, but it felt like nothing more than background noise to Claire. The victory was hollow, but only in the sense that it didn't mean the same thing as she had imagined it would. It wasn't just a win, it was a statement, and that statement was bigger than any trophy or title. As the crowd continued to cheer, Claire locked eyes with Marcus. There was no smug smile this time, no cocky wave. Instead, he stood motionless, his face pale under the bright lights. This was the moment he had been dreading, the moment that everything was about to change. The moment his past would come rushing back to claim him. Claire, Marcus's voice was low, almost a whisper, but the audience hushed, sensing the tension. He stepped toward her slowly, his hand extending toward her, a hesitant smile curling on his lips. But Claire wasn't fooled. She didn't shake his hand. Instead, she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. The crowd was silent now, all eyes on her. "What is this?" Marcus asked, his voice strained. She held the envelope up for everyone to see. The papers inside weren't just old photographs, they were records, official documents that laid bare the truth Marcus had fought so hard to bury. The falsified evidence that had destroyed her father's career, the bribes, the secret meetings, the lies. She opened the envelope, pulled out the papers, and held them in front of the audience. Claire's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "This is your truth, Marcus. You framed my father for something he didn't do. You betrayed him, and you did it all to take his place." A stunned murmur spread through the crowd, and Marcus's face drained of color. His eyes darted nervously between Claire and the papers in her hands. He was cornered, exposed for the first time. The mask he had worn for years was slipping, and the truth was no longer something he could deny. Claire stepped forward, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "You took everything from him. But today, I take it back. Today, I expose you for the liar and cheat you are." For a moment, it seemed as though Marcus might respond, but he was silent, his shoulders slumped as the truth hung in the air. The audience, once captivated by his charm, now looked at him with a mix of confusion, disgust, and pity. His world was crumbling. The announcer, unsure of how to handle the situation, hesitated for a moment before speaking up. Well, it seems we have a very unexpected twist in today's competition. But Claire didn't care about the announcer's words. She didn't care about the crowd's reaction. All she cared about was her father, Daniel Bennett, the man who had worked tirelessly for years, only to be betrayed by someone he had once called a friend. As she turned to leave the stage, she felt a hand on her arm. Marcus. His grip was firm, but there was no anger in his touch, only a desperation. I never meant for it to go this far, Claire. She stopped, but she didn't turn to face him. She couldn't. You didn't mean for it to go this far? Her voice was cold, sharper than she intended. You destroyed my father's life, and you didn't even care. No, Marcus. You don't get to apologize now. Not after everything you've done. With one last glance over her shoulder, Claire walked off the stage. She had won, but the victory felt bittersweet. The crowd's applause followed her, but it was distant now, almost meaningless. This wasn't about winning a competition. This was about exposing the truth, no matter how painful it was. As she made her way backstage, she found her father waiting for her, his face a mixture of pride and sadness. You did it, Claire, he said softly. She nodded, her throat tight. She wasn't sure how to feel. She had avenged him, but it hadn't brought him the redemption he deserved. It hadn't brought back the years he had lost. I had to do it, Dad. He smiled faintly, pulling her into a hug. I know you did. And I'm proud of you. But the real victory, it's not in the competition or the truth. It's in the way you carried yourself, the way you faced everything head-on. That's what matters most. Claire closed her eyes, holding on to her father as the weight of the day settled in. She had fought for justice. She had fought for her father's honor. And in the end, that was the real victory. The final shot cracked through the air like thunder, then faded into a silence so complete it almost felt sacred. Claire lowered her rifle slowly, her breath steady, her hands no longer trembling. The judges whispered behind their booth, spectators watched in awe, but Claire didn't hear any of it. Her eyes were lost in the haze of memory, locked on the image of her father standing beside her in spirit, proud, still, whole. As her name was called, she stepped forward, not toward applause or victory, but toward closure. From her jacket, she pulled out a weathered photograph of her father and gently placed it beside the trophy. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The weight on her shoulders had shifted, no longer the burden of injustice, but the peace that comes when truth is finally seen. And as she turned and walked away, the wind at her back felt different. Lighter. Like something, or someone, had finally been set free.